the planned maintenance aspects of Exadata. So again, this year, we've made a number of improvements since last Oracle World. And they all focus around these 4 different areas. So one is reducing database downtime, or at least the impact to the application while the maintenance is going on. Reducing the level of risk that there is anytime you change software configuration of the system, you're introducing risk. So one of our areas of focus is how do we reduce the level of risk when we're performing maintenance. Also to simplify it, either with the software itself or hopefully with the steps that we provide to you to simplify or to perform the operations. And also to transfer knowledge. So a quick overview, Ron talked about this. This really just kind of sets the level for software maintenance and where you do software maintenance. Start really at kind of the bottom, which is the storage grid. The storage grid contains Exadata storage server software. We call it cell software often. There's a corresponding component to that on the database grid, which is the Exadata Database Server OS, also the InfiniBand software, the Exadata core pieces. There's typically Linux or Solaris. Most of our customers, I think, are running Linux. Also on the database grid is the traditional database software. So that is the grid infrastructure, home, the database home, stuff that goes in there. And then also the piece that kind of ties both of these together is the InfiniBand network, and the software that runs there runs on InfiniBand switches, and that's the firmware that's on InfiniBand switches. So there are really kind of 4 layers, or 3 layers of components, and there are 4 types of software here. And so that's, you'll see this kind of theme throughout. So as far as where to find information about Exadata and releases and what's available, detailed information, it's the patching note. Does anybody know this note number off the top of their head? Anybody who's willing to admit it? Okay. There's a lot of information in here. So this is really the starting point. This contains, aside from just the information about the releases, also about critical issues, information about related products that would run on Exadata. What guidelines, for instance, Enterprise Manager, if you're managing an Exadata system, what versions should you be running, what patches should you have installed, and so on. The latest release of Exadata has been talked about already here this week, 11.2.3.2.0. It's either now officially downloadable or is in the process of being made downloadable. So that's the latest release. Grid infrastructure and the database and InfiniBand switch software, the latest releases are there. The recommended minimums. You should be on 11.2.2.42 at least by now. If you're not, you should be making plans to get to 11.2.3, 11.2.3.1.1 if you're making plans, or 11.2.3.2.0. Okay, so that's the minimum version you should be on right now, 11.2.2.14. That's been out, I think, since the beginning of the year, this year. The grid infrastructure and database, we support 11.2.01, 11.2.02, and 11.2.03. If you're on 11.2.01, you should have plans to be getting to 11.2.03 by now. We do still support it, but it's out of error correction support now, 11.2.01. So we're not providing any more bug fixes or enhancements to 11.2.01. And then also for the InfiniBand switch software, that 1.3.3.2 release, I'm still surprised that we have customers who are running older versions than that. That's been out for about a year and a half now. Everybody should be on that version by now. So I get asked this question a lot: how often should I be updating my database machine software? This is a suggested schedule. The first 2 there on the list, which is the Exadata software. Remember, there's a cell component to this, and then the database side component to this. That gets released not on a fixed schedule, but it gets released anywhere from 3 to 6 months. So you should be updating that every 3 to 6 months, 9 months maybe. You should not let this lag significantly. We still have customers I hear who are running on 11.2.1, and that's years old. So really, you should be updating that every 3 to 6 months, maybe 9 months. The database software, so this is the quarterly patch. That comes out on a quarterly basis. We also release one every month as an interim. You should be updating that again every 3 to 6 months, maybe 9 months. You should not let this software lag very far. Going to the next level every 1 to 2 years is updating the patch set. So this is going from, say, 11.201 to 11.203. That's about the release frequency of them. We're roughly about 18 months to 2 years maybe for patch sets, 12 months. Just depends on which one. I think between 11.202 and 11.203, we're at about 12 months. So you should be about a 1 to 2 year update cycle for patch sets. And also the InfiniBand switch software, they come out roughly about that 1 to 2 year cycle, and you should be picking those up shortly after the release. There are some additional components that were on that slide, like the Cisco switch. We really haven't had a need to update that software from an Exadata point of view. So I really don't talk about it within a presentation like this. But you should just keep it on your radar. The only reason we've had a need to update that is for monitoring. If there is a certain minimum version for the PDU firmware if you're using Enterprise Manager to monitor. So how do you get the software? You can get all those individual pieces I just talked about. So the cell software, the database quarterly patch, all the additional things that you might need like OPatch, the InfiniBand switch software. You can get that individually by just clicking on links in the patching note. Or you can download this quarterly full stack download patch. Quarterly full stack download patch, we release it quarterly, and it follows the database or the Oracle CPU schedule. So we release it in January, April, July, and October. And the content in there is what we would recommend people to go to at that time. So if you're gonna target something, you should target one of these, and then just move forward with these every 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So it contains, what we call infrastructure, so that's the stuff that's not database, and the database software, so that is the quarterly patch, so the stuff that goes into Oracle Home and the grid infrastructure home. And also the system management, so also the EM software is in there as well. And there are some updates to that, and that is changing. Regularly as the database stuff is changing. So the patching tools. So currently, we have the patching tools are the patching tools that would be used outside of Exadata for the non-Exadata specific components. For example, for updating Oracle Linux database servers, you use Yum. So that's the standard updating tool for Linux-based servers. For grid infrastructure and database quarterly patching, it's OPatch. So that's the standard Oracle tool. So these are the tools that you use. There are only 2 Exadata-specific tools that you use. One is for the storage server. It's called Patch Manager. It's released with the patch, with the release. And there's no other way to update Exadata storage servers. You should not be applying any software on a cell unless Patch Manager does it. So, or unless there's some other guidance from support. I'll talk about the risk of doing that a little later on. Also, ExaCheck, I call that really, I list that under patching tools. It's really system readiness. Is the system ready to be patched? Is the system ready to have software maintenance performed on it? So it doesn't perform any patching itself, but it does give you a sense, whether or not you have any warnings or alerts. There are things that are, misconfigured, something like that. You should run ExaCheck about a week before you're going to do planned maintenance to give you time to address warnings and alerts, and then run it again a day or 2 before you actually perform your planned maintenance. And I would not patch or perform any software maintenance on a system if ExaCheck has outstanding warnings or alerts that you're not sure will not affect the software maintenance. So there is another tool, I guess you could call it, for performing software maintenance, just for the database grid, the grid infrastructure, and the database home. So the stuff you would do with OPatch, and that's Enterprise Manager. So Enterprise Manager will apply the quarterly database patches. So it will apply the OPatch type patches into GI and database homes. For those familiar with OPlan, OPlan is the utility that simply creates the instructions for you to apply a database quarterly patch across your Exadata system. So what Enterprise Manager does in applying that is it essentially runs OPlan and creates an on-the-fly deployment procedure. And there are two, I think, primary benefits of using Enterprise Manager to perform this type of patching on Exadata. One is it reduces the risk of user error significantly. And the second is it orchestrates the application of the patch across all the nodes of the cluster. So typically when you install an OPatch type patch, you have to perform a set of instructions on the first node, and then do the second node, and then do the third node. So if you're doing it in a rolling manner, or if you're doing it in a non-rolling manner, then you do them all at the same time in parallel. But still, you're running those same commands manually on every single system. So Enterprise Manager will orchestrate that application of the patch for you. So Enterprise Manager, when it applies a quarterly database patch, it supports a couple different modes. In place, so you're modifying the software of the active home, or of the current home, I should say, or out of place. Also rolling and non-rolling. So out of place patching is what we would recommend. Out of place patching reduces the risk and the time it takes to apply patches. So when you apply an OPatch type patch out of place, you clone the existing home, you patch the cloned home while the system remains up and running, so there's no downtime, like the green area there. And once you're ready to make that an active patch, if you will, then you deploy the patch, which means making the grid infrastructure home the active home, or making the database home, switching databases to use instead of the current home, the now cloned patched home. So a quick word about rolling versus non-rolling patching. It's really a trade-off, I think. Rolling patching, less downtime to the application and to the database, but it takes longer to actually apply the patch or apply whatever software maintenance you're doing. My recommendation would be, if your maintenance window allows you to do non-rolling patching, that's what you do. But if you're going to do rolling patching, then I would try to do it whenever I wouldn't do it during month end, for example. Okay. A quick note about storage server rolling patching. If your RTO, so your recovery time objective, for recovering from a data loss scenario, is significant, when we do rolling patching for a storage server, we take the disks that are on that cell offline. So if you're at normal redundancy, you're now at reduced redundancy, which means you have one copy of some of the pieces of your database. If you happen to have a disk failure in some other storage server while that maintenance is going on, then there's a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance that the disk group will be dismounted and you will have data loss. Okay? So how you reduce the risk of that is you either use ASM high redundancy or you use DataGuard. So DataGuard is really the best tool that we have, feature, capability that we have to reduce the risk for planned maintenance. So the idea when you do planned maintenance with DataGuard in place is you perform the planned maintenance on the standby system, and you can let it run in that upgraded version for some period of time. And then when you're comfortable with it, you switch over. So now your primary is running the newer version, and then you patch the now new standby. You can do that. There's no dependency between the software for most of the software in Exadata. So the storage server software, ID software, the OS on the database side, there's no dependency. You can upgrade that as long as you are compatible within the software levels that you've upgraded to. There is a dependency, though, on the database software. So the database software, with physical standby, you have to be running the same patch set, so you have to be 11.202. But you can update that quarterly patch. So you can go from 11.203.2 on the primary and apply 11.203.5 to the standby, for example. So that's called a standby first installable patch. So it's in the README. It tells you whether or not all the Exadata patches, after 11.201 are standby installable qualified. If you're going from patch set upgrade 11.202 to 11.203, for example, that's where you're talking logical standby. Okay, switch gears a moment to talk about security updates. We really hear about security updates in two flavors. Database operating system is by far the most common, question we have about, how do I handle security updates? Usually, those come in because someone ran some security scan tool and it said that you're, you're at risk to some certain CVE. In order to understand how you deal with this situation, it's important to understand how the breakdown of the packages are on a database server. And it's really into two categories. The first category are what I call the Exadata core packages. It's not everything that's on your Exadata database server. It's just simply the things that are the core packages. In the owner's guide, there's a list. The thing that's the most important there is the kernel. You cannot update the kernel outside of performing an Exadata update. Okay? If you have a security scan tool that says that you are at risk to a certain CVE and it's identifying the kernel as the package, then refer to that MOS node. If the CVE that you're having a question about is not listed in there, then open an SR. The second type of packages are what I call just other packages. So these are ones that are not the core packages. They may have been installed with Exadata, like OpenSSL, or they may have been installed by you. So you may have installed some, backup utility, backup agent or something like that. Those are free to update, and typically the updates you would do there are from like OL5 channel 1 ULN. When you do that update, you have to use excludes to exclude the Exadata core packages so they don't come in. So updates to those don't come in as a result of some dependency of what you're installing. Okay. And the second is the database server. So this is the database software, and it's really just follows. Excuse me again. It follows just the standard CPU. So the quarterly patches that we release in in this month in October will contain the October CPU. So we're in line with all the CPUs in the database. Okay, quick word about consolidation in large environments. Since that is what many customers are using Exadata for. For consolidation, the grid infrastructure version needs to be greater than or equal to the database version. It's required to the 4th digit. I'd recommend it for the 5th digit also. Okay. The disk group compatible .rdbms property cannot be reverted once you increase it. So what that means is that tells ASM the minimum version of database that will run against this ASM. So if you take that ahead to 11.202, but then later you plan to install 11.201, for example, then it's not going to work. And the only way to revert it is to restore. Okay, so just advance that with care. Okay, it's in the upgrade guide. It's the generic upgrade guide about updating that. Just do it with care. And finally, share database homes whenever possible. But if you need to diverge because you have different patching requirements for different applications, then by all means. For large environments, you're allowed to run mixed Exadata versions. So you can run mixed versions of cells. So you can run 11.2311 and 11.2320 in the same Exadata cluster. I would only recommend that you do that for planned maintenance purposes, but it's possible to do. It's also possible to update the cells, but not yet update the database servers with that Exadata software. Again, I would only run that as a mixed version while you're doing planned maintenance. So if you happen to have, because of your maintenance windows, you have to separate the updates that you do, then you can, but I would just simply do that only for planned maintenance. I wouldn't make that a practice of how you run normally. And again, similar to this, using multiple maintenance windows, if you need to update multiple components. If you do that, I would update up the stack. So start with the InfiniBand switch software, then go to storage servers, database servers OS, so the Exadata piece to the database servers, and then finally the database homes and the grid infrastructure homes. Okay, finally, Avoiding common pitfalls. So, we have an internal list within Oracle, and we have a lot of questions that get asked by field support, phone support, and consultants, and these are kind of the ones that we see happen most often with customers. Do not make unsupported configuration changes to database server or to storage servers. If you do, it might work, but when we patch, it will be gone. Or if you patch, then it will break the patch. So don't do it. If it's not in the owner's guide or the user's guide, then it's not supported. If there's something you really, really need to do, because it looks just like the Linux system, then call support and ask about it. Okay. Second, for the database server OS and firmware, so this is for the Linux piece. If you make configuration changes, then you really do need to test these. We're much more free to make changes to the database servers because we support it. However, we've had plenty of customers who have made changes, didn't really test it, they never rebooted the system because of the change they made. 3 months later, they apply an Exadata patch, and the patch fails because it never rebooted. Well, the root cause was the change they made 3 months ago. So you have to test these because during patching, there's going to be a system reboot, and you can break that patching, and we'll have no idea why it broke. It looks like black-eyed Exadata. I would really discourage changes to the database servers if you can avoid them, because just stay on the Exadata train. It would be my recommendation. For the database software, if you're doing a patch set upgrade, we have specific notes about Exadata. They're upgraded just like regular databases, but since we know the configuration, we know where the pitfalls are, we really need to follow those. So the general best practices, kind of summing up everything that I've said, you really want to stay up to date. You want to familiarize yourself with the documentation and innovations before you patch. So you really want to plan. You want to test and rehearse. And ExaCheck, you want to fix the warnings and alerts before you actually patch. So that was my whirlwind of Exadata software maintenance. I'm going to hand it over now to my compadre for demonstration on it.
Thank you. Thanks. So we'll do another whirlwind. Hopefully give you as much information as Doug was able to do at the same time. Let me ask you a question first. Who or how many in the audience are actually running Enterprise Manager at this point? Good. Good. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Now, hands for version 11. Okay, you guys, we need to pick you up a little bit. We're going to talk a lot about version 12 today. Version 12, just real fast. And for you guys, I hope we'll be able to give you some information today as well. So I am going to try and cover 3 main things as we go through today. So first of all, we're talking about managing an Exadata environment. Right? So what do we need to do when we are managing this Exadata environment? The first thing we need to do is we need to know what's going on in our Exadata environment. So our idea is to be able to give you a single pane of glass. We want all of the information from that engineered system diagram that Doug showed you earlier to be able to say, I want all of that stuff to come into Enterprise Management. Right? For those of you who are running on 11 and have seen how we do it in 11, it was a little bit of a hand crank sort of an exercise. In 12, we've gotten a lot better with that. I'm going to spend some time talking about how we can make your life a little bit easier. Okay? What else can we do? We need to protect that monitoring configuration. Right? We need to make sure that if we are going to depend on our Exadata is going to be mission critical within our environment, our Enterprise Manager and our other tools deployments have to be mission critical as well. Right? And to talk about, you mentioned ExaCheck, I have a little bit on that. There are some other things that we can also take advantage of, some other utilities and tools that we provide to you to be able to keep your Enterprise Manager and your Exadata up and running. And then the third thing, if we're doing all this, have we really delighted our customers? We all serve customers at the end of the day. How are we making sure that our customers are getting the best service out of what it is that we're doing for them? We'll spend just a few minutes on that. Okay, so Enterprise Manager version 12. This is a diagram. Give me a toy. That's not working. Oh well, sorry. This is a diagram of what our engineered systems looks like in version 12. There's a schematic representation of what the hardware actually looks like. As I mentioned, the engineered systems booth down in the front end by Moscone North. We do have it up and running. Actually, we have it up and running for all of that big hardware that's down there. So you can Exadata, but for some of the other systems that we're showing as well. What's our point? We want to be able to show the hardware. We want to be able to show the software. We want to be able to show the configuration of the software. So while we have this diagram here, sort of, but not really. So we have the diagram here, of course, of the machines, but then we have this piece over here where we're able to actually explode down into each of the pieces of the hardware and the software that are relevant to you. The storage cell, and the database software, and the hardware alerts that come in as well. Okay, so how does this work for you? Okay. Something mentioned earlier that we do not allow you to do anything on the storage cell. No changes to the storage cell, and yet we need to be able to bring that information back into Enterprise Manager so that you can have that all in that pane of glass that you're trying to build. So what we do, in Enterprise Manager, we have the agent. The agent is installed onto the compute nodes, right, if you were inside that Exadata rack. And then as you can see here, we're actually reaching out from those compute nodes to the different bits of components that are inside of the Exadata rack. Okay. So in version 12, I'll talk a little bit more about this, what we're still doing is we're reaching out to the database storage server. We're reaching out using SSH to go ahead and grab that information and bring it back in. We're reaching out to the InfiniBand network, same sort of model. And we're reaching out to the other bits of hardware. We're gathering information, and we're also having that information shipped back to us via SNMP. Okay? So our goal is we run this thing, and we mentioned it earlier, it's a database, right? At the end of the day, we're still using that database agent, that core piece of functionality that we have within the Enterprise Manager to be able to maintain and manage databases, to then be able to extend that through reaching out to the various different components, still running everything on the compute node server, and sending things back into the EM repository. Okay. How do we do that? For those who are running Enterprise Manager version 12, you've seen some of the changes that we have. The core change that we did in this version of the product was to go from a monolithic model to a plug-in based model. So in version 11 and previous versions of Enterprise Manager, when you installed EM, that was kind of it, right? It knew what it knew at that time about the various targets that are out there. So your Enterprise Manager version 11 was never really going to be able to manage database version 12, right? You would have to install and update the framework to be able to get new information about new versions of Oracle software that were available. EM12, we changed all that. We said, okay, what we need to be able to do is have a plug-in based model. And that plug-in based model allows us to have a framework. So it's still the same traditional framework we've had with EM, where we have the repository, we have the middle tier OMS, and we have the agent that I was just talking about a moment ago. But now what we're able to do is when there are new versions of software or new versions of hardware, we can go ahead and we use a store-based model. Store-based model allows you to go out and say, I want to go ahead and download the latest version of a plugin, and I want to push that out to my OMS. Once I have that in my OMS, I'm then able to say, well, it's really these particular sets of agents that I need to be able to use and do that particular monitoring. So I only push that plugin out to those particular agents. What's the benefit? You wind up with a very lightweight agent that only knows what it needs to know to monitor the targets that you have out there, and is able to be updated as we release new versions of the monitoring or management software that we have available. So for example, last year we released EM12 actually at this show. We've now gone ahead and we've done 2 updates to the framework, the core OMS and repository component. The latest one, for those who haven't been keeping track, was released about 2 weeks ago. We've actually had 3 releases of the Exadata plugin. And we will continue to crank the Exadata plugin out now, and you'll be able to go out and download and get the latest set of either fixes or functionality that we're pushing out through that particular plugin. Right? Beauty, you don't have to go through a whole EM framework update most of the time, there's always exceptions, most of the time, to be able to get that new set of functionality. So from the standpoint of what Doug was talking about earlier, your maintenance windows can be less, right? And you only have to worry about updating those particular agents on those particular targets. Now, this is not just for Exadata, although I'm showing over here that we have the Exadata plugin and the health check plugin. It's also for all of the core targets. It's the way the entire EM product works now for Health. Okay. So for those who are not on EM12, what we decided to do is try and make this even easier for you to be able to get to 12, especially for those of you who are on Exadata. Okay? We coined this sort of phrase that we call the ExaKit. And the idea of the ExaKit is we now will be able to give you a script that you can download that has the latest set of the Oracle Enterprise Manager binaries. So that new release that I mentioned just a moment ago that came out a couple weeks ago. You can actually go out and you can download a package that will go ahead and specifically install for you an OMS and an OMR onto a single Linux 64-bit or 32, I think it's still 32-bit, certainly 64. You can install that, and it will go ahead and it will do all that configuration for you. So the install is really just sort of point this thing, give it a couple of parameters, and let it go ahead and crank. You will then be able to download another sequence part of that kit that will be able to push the agents out to your Exadata environment. What we do at that point is we take advantage of the configuration files that are built in the one command process. We read those to be able to do a lot of the configuration for your install. The point of this exercise is Enterprise Manager is our management tool for engineering systems, and we want to make sure that you can get an opportunity to, minimally kick the tires on the thing. Or at least we've run in and worked with some other organizations where they were running version 10 or they were running version 11, and they were stuck in that monolithic framework thing that I was talking about a moment ago. This allowed people to very quickly download the kit, instantiate the Enterprise Manager environment, and push it out to their Exadata system. And in some cases start using that as their production monitoring tool going forward until they were able to bring the rest of the core organization's EM infrastructure forward to the latest release. So they have the note number out there, and as I said, what we do is we release these Exa kits trailing only a little bit behind new framework updates that we do for Enterprise Manager. Okay. So once you get Enterprise Manager's framework installed, and once you get the agent out there, and once you get the plugin pushed, you still need to go through the process of discovering the Exadata target itself. Okay? So what we have also done to try and make this a little bit easier is we've come up with a flow that essentially once the agent is installed, we have an auto discovery widget that will actually allow you to go ahead and sort of gather that information from those one command files. We then have a flow within EM where we say, okay, discover Exadata. It says, all right, I've read this file. Oh, I now know about all of these particular bits of hardware that are out there. You can assign a monitoring agent, the third box that I have over there. So what we've done is within Enterprise Manager, we have the concept of an active-passive monitoring agent. Right? So you have all of those compute nodes. And I mentioned earlier that those agents are reaching out across to download the hardware or to get the information from the storage cell. In the event that one of those agents or one of those compute nodes has to go down for maintenance or there's some sort of an issue under the covers, Enterprise Manager has the ability to fail over the monitoring from the agent that we normally do to another agent within that rack. So what we're giving you is sort of a seamless experience where the target monitoring continues even if there's some sort of a hardware. That's the thing we're trying to engineer in. Once you have the assigned the monitoring agent, you give it the component credentials and the monitoring properties, and you kick it off. And it goes ahead and it fills that chart that I showed you. You have all this stuff. So, again, for those of you who saw what we put out for version 11, we did the time study on it, and we got a tenfold increase. We got a tenfold decrease in the amount of time it actually took to set up an EM environment and have it running from a long day to an hour. is what we were able to do. Okay. So I talked about all this stuff like it's all goodness, and it's all wonderful, and it's all great, and it's not always all wonderful and goodness and great. Sometimes stuff happens along the way. We get it, right? So in terms of things that commonly go wrong, right? Here's a couple of things that we run into with a lot of customers. What we see is some customers who do this discovery have used one command, they've gone ahead and they've done their initial install, and then maybe they've done something where the rack is installed inside of the development zone, and they've gone ahead and moved it, right? They've changed the IP for hosting under the covers of the rack. The configuration file that we're using to make that auto discovery simple is generated at the original configuration of the rack from one command. So if you change under the covers where this machine physically is, our configuration file is wrong, right? That's a problem for us. We wind up getting very confused. So you do have to make sure that that file is up to date. If that file is not up to date, you can work with support to get an up-to-date version of the file created for you. Right? Using the admin network for the components, that's a best practice that we enforce. Right? SSH needs to be available. We've seen that happen quite a bit because we do depend, as I mentioned, on being able to reach out across the network to be able to get the statistics and the data that we need, and making sure that the owner of the agent that you've installed on the compute node is able to read the XML file that we're actually using for our configuration data and the KFOD executable because we're using that to do some things with the IP network. So, okay, we have some problems. How do we handle that? We handle that by at least giving you an audit script. Okay? So the note that I mentioned here is a prerequisite script that will allow you to go ahead and check to make sure that the things that we've sort of discovered are common problems are up to date on your system before you go ahead and you actually do that discovery. Okay? The middle button there, or the middle bullet there, is one that we've run into quite a bit, where SNMP trap forwarding is not set because it's something that we don't automate. It's in the documentation. I mean, if you read the doc, you'll know you need to go ahead and you need to tell those particular hardware components that they need to send it. But if you don't do it, you will not get those traps forwarded. So I mentioned it here. It's a good best practice to make sure that you're actually going through that as well. And then post-configuration, one of the things that you can do with Enterprise Manager is you can build a dashboard. Right? And what I mean by a dashboard is essentially, I showed you that rack and all of those details on the very first slide. You can build a high-level report out of Enterprise Manager that is accessible without a password, and it's just a read-only report, and it just sort of shows a status of all the different hardware and services that's running on there. You can sort of configure that to your own shop use. For those who are administrators, a lot of times what we find is the business owners, the people who probably paid for the rack that you're now running, love this report, right? Because they get to go in and it's got green circles that show up arrows and nice uptime numbers, and they get to look at it and say, is my system up and running, everything is good. The benefit for you is you get to give them real-time, up-to-date data without ever giving them administrative access to your Enterprise Manager console, right? And you don't have to do anything. You kind of get it for free by using the same data that you're already using to manage the ExaData system that's available to you. So to make it easy, we actually built a note and script to allow you to build that dashboard and has some examples. Right? So what do you get? You go through all this work, and you try to make it as easy as possible. And you get a view, schematic that you can see of all your hardware, all your software, that allows you to see the utilization of your database components and the utilization of your storage cell components. And it's all coming in one single pane of glass. That was our goal. Okay. So now, what happens when things go wrong? Because they do. That's why you spent the time to put all this stuff together in the first place. In Enterprise Manager, what we try to do is use a console called the Incident Management Console. Okay? Where essentially, when alerts happen, what we're trying to do and get smarter with in each release is aggregate those alerts and put them into a single box so that you're not being flooded by alerts. They go into one place, and we're trying to give you some intelligence on what we think the problem might do. Gotta tell you, this is in its infancy. Right? But this is where we're trying to go with the product. Right? We're trying to make the product be able to make that Incident management's been around for a while. We continue to build more information about how Exadata can take advantage with each release as we go forward. Right? In addition, for those who don't, many people use ticketing systems. Right? Enterprise Manager can be used to send information out to ticketing systems as well, so that you can continue to use ticketing systems as your workflow whenever there is an alert. It can go out to your system. People then use it to go ahead and route their tickets back to their operations console and go from there. So I bring it up to say, within EM you have an incident console where we give you information and you can ship it out. You get the benefit of both. Okay. So shipping out the information internally is great. What happens when you really want to do something and or you don't really want to do this? What happens when something really happens and you need to get it fixed? Right? ASR, our automated service request. So ASR is an old technology. It was a pre-Sun acquisition technology. Hands familiar? Anybody using it? Not as many as I would have thought, to be honest with you. Someday I'd like to know why, but I don't think I have time to go into that right now. Just as a summary, right? What we have within, not within Enterprise Manager, but within our suite of tools, we have a thing called the ASR Manager, which is a lightweight process that you can run one per data center. It is configured to receive SNMP traps, do some filtering, and if it decides that it's got something that's valid and wants to push it forward, it can send that trap over to us at Oracle, where we can then do an additional level of filtering and then open up an SR. Right? For engineered systems, this is great, right? Because you can go ahead and if something's happening, you are already having that trap forwarded out from your organization to our organization so that we can get started on trying to resolve it for you. We want to make sure that we maintain that uptime as much as possible. Okay? To be fair, right, at this point in time, ASR is really managing hardware faults from the compute nodes and the storage cells. Right? So it doesn't yet cover everything that is in that full Exadata rack, but it does cover quite a bit. Right? And we'll get that information back over to us right away so that we can start to open a ticket for you. As a matter of fact, I list here that on Oracle.com we have a couple of pretty specific pieces of documentation. We have the quick install guide for ASR. And we also have a list of all of the things that ASR does monitor for you. So every alert code is in there for you to take a look at. Moving forward from 11.231, right? Now we're starting to integrate. So what we do is the ASR commands that you need to run to configure your Exadata to be able to send information to the ASR manager. We're trying to do that work for you. And we're producing that both as a script and trying to run some of those automation steps throughout the install. Right? Auditing your install is important. Right? So we have something that we call ASR ExaCheck. We'll play on our other ExaCheck thing. Where we can make sure that your ASR, if there are common problems that we're aware of, much in the same way that we do for ExaCheck, we can check those for your ASR install as well, and make sure that we know about it, we're at least correcting it on your side. All right, I'm going to skip talking about ExaCheck. I'm just going to show that the loss node is up there. Doug did mention it. This is our vehicle for talking about best practices. This is fairly frequently refreshed. As we find things out, this is where we publish it. This is where you should be able to get it. Okay. One thing I do want to spend a moment to talk about is EM diagram. Right? So for installing Enterprise Manager, right, Enterprise Manager is a fairly complex tool in and of itself. 3 tiers, running on the database with the WLS stack inside of it. So we do have a lot of moving parts within here. So we do produce this tool, if you will, that will go out and verify best practices on the agent side, the LMS side, and the repository side. This is a good tool to sort of run on a regular basis, especially if you're maintaining an operational thing or you're patching your EM environment. You want to make sure that in the same way that you're running ExaCheck, you're running EM Diag to make sure that your environment is staying up to date and fresh. I spent a very quick time talking about Platinum support. In terms of what's available to you, we talked about how to monitor all of these environments. We talked about how to audit all of these particular environments. what Oracle is now offering for you is we've always had the Premier support, now we have the Platinum support. So the things that Doug talked about in terms of patching, right? These are services that can now be done for you through the Platinum support model if your system is on configuration. These folks are downstairs. Again, just like with all the hardware, down at that booth in Muscogee North, the folks who are doing this are available to you. I encourage you to please come down and have a conversation with them and find out more of the services they offer. The last step, we talk about delighting the customer, right? People talk an awful lot about performance, right? And performance of Exadata. We list a bunch of metrics in Enterprise Manager. We often talk about thresholds, right? Thresholds are available to you based on, what your system works on. So I always recommend to people, if you want to set thresholds, if you're interested in metric values, first tune your system, and then once your system is tuned, capture baseline thresholds. Okay? Give yourself some padding for warning or critical, and that way when you do have changes, you can actually get those across. Right? Some interesting metrics to monitor are listed in that MOSTA 111.675.1. So, quick summary, since they've opened the doors on me, what do we need to do? Define your team. Define the way your team works. Ron talked a lot about that. Make sure you're doing regular maintenance. Proper planning leads to making sure there are fewer mistakes. Enterprise Manager is your pane of glass. And protect Enterprise Manager and your Exadata installation with the tools we all need to do. That. A couple slides when you pick up the presentation on a lot of these different MOSAs and websites. And a lot of other sessions that are